So one of the best things about this channel is that we get to interview people from a variety of different perspectives. So we just had someone on who was a moderate Democrat. Before that, we had a libertarian presidential candidate. And then we love having conservative authors. And today we get to do that. We have an author who has written about his support for Donald Trump. He's got an amazing book that I really hope that you check out that talks about that, talks about his support and why he believes that Trump is doing a great job. And I think it's going to be an amazing interview. Really, what I hope you get to see from it is if you are somebody who supports Trump already, I think you're going to find some validation for your beliefs. But even if you don't, if you consider yourself to be a liberal or a moderate, or you just don't support Donald Trump for whatever reason, I really recommend that you take a look at this book and listen to this interview, because what he's going to do is talk about exactly why he finds that support for Donald Trump. And it may be different than what you think of most Trump supporters. There may be more to it than you originally judged. So he uses a pseudonym for his book. So out of respect for that, we're going to call him Mr. Cartman, and we're going to go ahead and bring him on. So welcome, sir. How you doing?
Hi, Wes. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Yeah. So could you talk a little bit about that first? So I know I use a pseudonym for this project. We use the Burking Conservative for a couple different reasons. It kind of separates personal life from our professional life. So could you tell me how you came to that and how it's influenced your book?
Yeah, it's funny. When I wrote the book, I originally was going to write the name under anonymous, one of the people in the Trump White House supposedly that had put out a book or warning about Trump and labeled it anonymous, and I thought that might put it right back in their face. But the the kind of wacky pseudonym that I used to write the book, Mansplainer, Solzhenitsyn, Cartman, was really more of, I guess, a descriptive of the tone of the book, in that I think we all know about mansplaining now, and I think that really kind of put it right back in the liberals' face. And Solzhenitsyn, well, he was a Russian dissident who lived in Soviet Union and was thrown into gulags by a liberalized totalitarian state there. And I think most of us has seen South Park and know about Cartman. So I think my book tries to pick up some of that tone as well.
Okay.
And so I gave my book, I guess, really a caveman or Neanderthal title, just to rattle people's cages. Kicking
Yeah.
ass on the road to Rushmore, Trump supporters' Bible. And I think, I can't imagine anything more confrontational. I suppose I could have put a giant middle finger on the cover, but instead I went with a
Right.
picture of a MAGA hat, figuring it'd have the same triggering effect of the haters. There's a lot of thinking and science and research that went into the book. And while it feeds Trump's base, and like you suggested, it really kind of goes after people in the middle and presents not just an intellectual argument, but also a humorous approach to dealing with subjects that I think centrist libertarians, lukewarm Republicans would stretch their brains and their thinking, and really kind of builds a case for Trump and just absolutely brutalizes his enemies and haters.
Yeah. One of the things I hear you talking about is censorship, right? And we think about the political correctness that is so much a part of the media in our society now. And really, I think Trump kind of rose to prominence fighting that censorship first. I mean, I think about the interactions that he had with Megyn Kelly during the Republican presidential debates. So tell me about that. Like, what exactly would you say is the source or censorship, or why does it exist so prevalent in our society today?
It's very simple. I think I'm surprised more people haven't picked up on this. The reason why we're seeing so much censorship in society today is because one group is dominating another and wants to consolidate or complete their stranglehold on their thinking or cultural orthodoxy. Liberals dominate today's culture. I mean, you look at Hollywood, academia, the media, and now social media. Those are all the drivers of culture. Whereas 100 years ago, it might have been, the family or church. And today's world is different. So those drivers of culture have all been liberalized since the 1960s. And, it really kind of creeps into people's thinking without them even knowing or realizing it.
Yeah.
The reason why we're seeing all this censorship, certainly on social media and places like that, is because they know they're losing the intellectual battle, and they're trying to cut off all debate. They want to create safe spaces in college. And the people say, well, what do you mean liberals are losing? Well, you look at what culture's become and what's delved into, and why Trump came along.
Yeah.
Even before the coronavirus, their world of fairy tale globalism and liberalism was crumbling, and their ideas were being challenged
Yeah.
as their post-1960s ideologies exposed as not entirely workable and has a large basis of fantasy. I mean, we have huge budget deficits, and we all see the PC nonsense spewing out of the colleges. But their secularist world is crumbling after 8 years of Obama. We see higher rates of depression, higher rates of suicide. The wages aren't just stagnant, but have gone down for the last 30 years, even when adjusted for inflation.
Yeah.
So, that's even with two breadwinners in the House. So Trump comes along and he starts to challenge all these orthodoxies, and liberals' heads explode.
Right. So let me ask you this, though. Has censorship always been a part of liberal beliefs, or do you think that liberal beliefs have changed over time as they've gotten more power?
Oh, that's a great question. Liberal beliefs clearly have changed. I think, there's a disconnect in American-style liberalism and global classical liberalism. That American-style liberalism is all about free spending, big budgets, and more free spending to assuage their moral guilt.
Yeah.
But the reason, again, why liberals are because their world that they created ideologically, it's not entirely working. So to cut off any debate might reinforce their thinking or their way of thought. And it's so funny and it's so hypocritical, because these are the guys in the 1960s that created the free speech movement in Berkeley. I think in 1964 was when it first started and gained prominence. And now you look at what's going on in Berkeley nowadays. When conservative speakers go to speak there, they freak out. Antifa shows up with bags of weed and fire bombs and tries to close the whole thing down.
Yeah, I mean, I think of like Bill Maher, right? Like someone who certainly doesn't consider himself conservative in any sense, typically supports Democrats, calls himself a liberal, and yet he gets censored from places like that. And he's just like, what has happened? We've come to this point where we cannot even sustain a challenge.
Yeah, sometimes he puts his foot in his mouth, and knowingly or unknowingly.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Sometimes you see a disconnect with him and his audience. I think his audience is becoming more AOC style liberal.
Right.
And like you said, Bill Maher really is kind of a classical liberal. That I think classical liberalism had been defined years ago, in that it was about personal economic freedom, the rule of law, and progress.
Yeah.
And that's really kind of morphed. And I think it mentioned American liberalism, embodied by the Democratic Party's free spending, free living, more free spending to cover their free living, and just to assuage their moral guilt, more free spending so they can be looked at as good people.
Right.
Even though most of them are a bunch of sociopaths. I'm going to save the world, but I'm going to do it with your money.
Right. So help me understand then, when you talk about Trump in relation to, say, Teddy Roosevelt, I think you compare Trump to previous presidents. You talk about Andrew Jackson, but you talk about Teddy Roosevelt, and you even say that Trump is a progressive in a similar sense. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, it was interesting. The concept of progressivism in society really kind of took off just before the 20th century.
Yeah.
And the Republicans, led by Teddy Roosevelt, really were some of the big drivers of change in progressivism. I mean, progressivism started out as being able to pave streets, put in sewer systems in cities, and really kind of clean up the cities, create an environment where people could succeed with hard work. And that was the essence of progressivism. What progressivism is morphed into today, or whatever the whacked out progressivism Democrats are preaching, really is more regressivism. So I don't think liberals should ever be referred to as progressives, because what they're doing is not progress. That we've seen how the American economy really took it on the chin, and just the destruction of American families, where now 40% of all kids are born out of wedlock. I don't know how that's progress. I don't know how that makes them richer or happier. I mean, you look at how many people are on drugs and antidepressants and things like that. Right. Before Trump came, a lot of that was driven by the unemployment, or the economic conditions. But progressivism should be about progress, and the Democrats have really lost their way.
Yeah. So, I think we fleshed out what Trump is fighting against. You call him a warrior in your book, and I think it's clear that he's fighting against this new liberalism, the lack of tolerance, or the PC culture that prevents any type of debate or challenge to its ideals. But help me understand, what is he fighting for? So now that he's in office, he's been able to challenge the things that we described. He's in a position to be able to make change. What would you say are his beliefs or ideals in a positive sense?
It's funny. First and foremost, the old cliche that, and he put it on a hat. I mean, that's part of his branding effort.
Yeah.
The "Make America Great Again" became his catchphrase, and he sought to again restore America to what it was. And it's funny. People will ask, why did Donald Trump use the slogan "Make America Great Again"? And
Yeah.
I'll assume that's because the phrase "Yippee-ki-yay, motherfuckers" is
Yeah.
already taken by the movie Die Hard.
Right. Right. Yeah.
It's funny that again, I think I try to use pop culture quotes in my book to kind of describe where we're at now. And I think, like, for example, in the chapter on Comey and the deep state, using the movie Die Hard, when that helicopter exploded on the roof of Nakatomi Plaza, the lead cop on the ground saw the massive explosion, saw the fried FBI agents, and said, "Wow, look at that explosion! Jeez, I guess we got to get some new FBI guys." So, Trump and fighting Comey and the deep state. Trump fights everybody to, again, restore what is progress and what is progressivism. And it's interesting. I think Trump had an agenda before he got in the White House. I think he wanted to spend money on more large government projects, infrastructure projects, things like that. And I think a lot of that's been derailed because we've had to spend money on other things here, obviously, lately. But he came out, and change is difficult.
Yeah.
Anytime you want change, you're going to have to fight for it. I think you look at Barack Obama. He wanted to enact change with his programs, and he saw great resistance. Almost every president. Lyndon Johnson wanted to create a great society, and Vietnam derailed that. Reagan wanted to cut government, and government got larger after Reagan was done.
Yeah.
So it's tough to enact change unless you're a warrior. And Trump certainly is a warrior. And, it's funny, I think I mentioned in my book that I know a little something about warriors, that it's interesting. One of our old next door neighbors, for instance, was a great warrior, was Bruce Lee. He was the Bruce Lee.
Oh, really?
And interesting. Again, I grew up in Hollywood. I think that's another one of my angles of my book in fighting the culture wars. I grew up with so many famous people, so many Academy Award winners and famous celebrities, sports stars, things like that.
Sure.
I'm not impressed or intimidated by those people. They're just regular people that have specialized skills or abilities. So I think Trump also kind of goes after those people that, we live in a society of celebrity worship syndrome, and celebrities are the new gods.
Yeah.
And I love that, Ricky Gervais is a warrior. He goes after those people, not with a scalpel, but with a flamethrower.
Sure.
And Trump in his fight, he's got to fight everybody.
Yeah. Well, and you see the way that he is able to stay at the center of the conversation and the debate, and to keep his cameras on him. And I think it speaks to what you're talking about, is understanding the reality TV culture, understanding Hollywood, understanding what actually drives public opinion and people to tune in and watch. I mean, he's learned that through his history. But then, what I'm specifically focusing on is, I think that there is Trump, the showman, Trump, the person who commands attention, and then there is Trump, the decision maker, right? So we did a video that I'd love to share with you on his policy in the Middle East, and you see Trump investing in numerous different countries, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Israel. And what he's doing is he's making these very smart, strategic economic decisions and building partnership. And that's just in the Middle East. You can bring up India and plenty of other countries where he's making these different gains for our country. And then at the same time, that's kind of dismissed by the media. I mean, I've seen him with placards and posters, holding up the deals that he's done, and that's entirely dismissed. And then, of course, they wonder why he's made so many gains economically, why the country, up until this COVID crisis, had been doing so well in terms of those gains that they dismiss.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's a good point. I think the one thing that Trump's not given enough credit for is I think politics over the last 30, 40 years has delved into ideology.
Yeah.
more than kind of taking an intellectual look. And Trump doesn't get enough credit for his pragmatism.
Yeah.
That first and foremost, he's a businessman and he wants to work the best possible deal. And you also talk about Trump. He gets criticized for being a narcissist. If he was such a narcissist, why wouldn't he be doing the things that would give him a rating in the 80s or 90%, where he would just cater to everybody's needs? No, he's kind of a hard ass, and he's kind of like a father. No more mommy party rule of like Obama, or compassionate conservatism with Bush, where I think the Republicans, or the rhinos, or the neocons, had kind of thrown in the towel and said, you know what, we're never going to get elected if we're a bunch of hard asses and say no to spending and no to everything.
Yeah.
That we're going to have to participate in what the Democrats are doing as far as liberalized giveaways and graft and
Sure.
all that other stuff that made the Democrats so successful. I mean, they got successful buying their way into office. And the Republicans, I think, certainly around by the time Bush, certainly turn of the century, kind of threw in the towel. And I think that's why we've seen soaring budget deficits. And Trump really is the first guy that's put his foot down, and he said no.
Yeah. I mean, I think of several decisions, like examples that back up your point. One would be with Iran. I mean, there were so many people in the media and otherwise who believed that Trump was going to go into Iran and invade, and it was going to be World War III. There'd be all these people dead as a result of, an imprudent policy that he was formulating, and that wasn't the case at all. He was certainly putting Iran on notice. He's taking out Soleimani. He ordered that strike. But at the same time, going back to what I said before, that missing piece of the economic relationships that he had built in the Middle East, he's not going to jeopardize those by being irrational or taking it to an extreme point. And I think that's that prudence that we are talking about that frankly lines up with some of the founding fathers, and including Edmund Burke, the person our channel is based off of. And so we see some agreement there in terms of the actual decisions made, right? As well as with this COVID crisis. I think if Trump truly was a racist, you would think that he would be shutting down immigration immediately. And yet you see him now working through that decision months into this crisis, working with his administration to try to do this in a smart way. And a lot of times that is missed because it seems like his opponents are constantly focusing on his Twitter or his thought process that leads up to this decision rather than the decision itself.
Yeah, I think you mentioned what he does in Iran, for example.
Yeah.
Again, taking a pragmatic approach. I don't think he wants to get bogged down in any kind of quagmire war. I think his thinking is it's nice to do a quick decapitation strike on guys like Soleimani,
Sure,
and wipe him out. And that kind of puts Iran on notice that I'm not messing around. I think ultimately the one thing that guides him that I'm not sure he's worked out in his head, and maybe I'm not giving enough credit, but first and foremost, if Iran ever got a nuclear weapon, it changes the entire calculus in the Middle East completely. Is that now all of a sudden they have a nuclear umbrella to conduct whatever ideological expansion they want to, and that ideological expansion usually is carried out through acts of terrorism and
sure.
going after other governments. And I think that's why right now you see this war between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And we've really allied ourselves with Saudi Arabia, and that's an interesting dance. For as much as we've allied ourselves with Saudi Arabia, you look at the price of oil and how Trump's trying to fight the coronavirus and trying to deal with the collapsing oil market and protect American jobs in the shale industry. It's an interesting dance. You really get a good feel for all the complexities of what it is to be president of the United States.
I like that the way you described that. You're talking about an interesting dance. I mean, he's doing that with COVID, right? Because on the one hand, you've got the shut everything down, right? Do the distancing and all that, outlaw everything. And that's an extreme position based largely on fear. But some measures are practical and can help, not the extreme ones, but some measures can certainly help. Standing 6 feet apart, that type of thing, trying to protect some of the folks that are high risk. On the other hand, you've got the reckless, let's not have anything, right? And so he's balancing the doctors on the one hand and their recommendations, but then the governors who all have different opinions, right? Different situations. He's balancing what his constituents want in the media. And this, like you said, it's this dance that doesn't have just one answer, but it's this progression through. And how fascinating is that this person who says these things, is constantly on his Twitter, has this bombastic approach to politics, yet has this very skilled manner of balancing those multiple perspectives that, again, is often lost. So
Yeah, you bring up a good point earlier as well that, again, dealing with the coronavirus, if you research the history of presidents, a lot of presidents have been derailed by external forces.
yeah,
And, you can make an argument like Lyndon Johnson, for example. Before he got into office, he had this concept of this great society. And we see how this Vietnam War that he inherited really kind of derailed that. And
yeah,
you look at the coronavirus and how Trump has to deal with it. And I think he's doing a lot of the right things.
yeah,
That I can't say I'm 100% behind everything that he's doing. I think you can question what's going on with the testing, things like that, and also the tone. You see him at times; he's still fighting the culture war during some of these press conferences, and at times his greatest strength at times is also his greatest weakness. That he'll speak from the heart, or he'll brainstorm out loud. Like he'll ask
right,
questions like what is warm weather and sunlight going to do, and will disinfectants work?
yeah,
What about these anti-malarial drugs, things like that?
yeah,
And where he's thinking out loud, that the press will just crucify him. They'll take clips and sound bites, and they'll just put it right back at him.
sure,
I think if Trump also too, he could build a strong case that if Trump pulled an Obama, where he'd end his press conferences kind of like a fireside chat, like Franklin Roosevelt, where he'd say something like, I believe in love and faith in God, and a lot of hard work will help us heal physically and spiritually and defeat this virus. And, with faith in God and each other will prevail, say something like that, his ratings would soar. And I think Trump is so focused in trying to fight this, trying to manage this. Good for him. He kind of decentralizes some of the management. He says, well, some of these governors are a lot closer to the issues in their states than I am. I don't want to have a centralized Politburo style solution to this problem, because as we saw in the Soviet Union, the less decentralized, or the more centralized things are, the bigger the problems you have.
sure.
So
Yeah, he's
he's
these different things, and he's working towards discovering answers. And I mean, the media wants to play the game that, well, we should have known this from the beginning, but who knew from the beginning? You see Dr. Fauci himself making different statements now than, of course, he made it just a few weeks or months ago. And so
oh yeah.
the medical community is learning about this new problem that few, if any, foresaw being as big as it is now. And so as he's working through that, as opposed to, like you would say, Obama, who would kind of pretend like he has it all together and work through all that stuff behind closed doors, Trump is bringing that progression to the front, and that's difficult for people to get their minds around. One last question, though, for you is, when you talk about earlier, you talked about what actually motivates Trump and kind of his guiding ideals. My last question for you is about class, specifically when we talk about the working class, because when you see Trump's strongest base, or the people that support him the most, often it seems to be from the working class, from middle class, lower class, that type of thing, and very, very solid support that's been behind him the entire way. Help me understand, because you talk about that in the book. For example, when we were comparing Trump to Teddy Roosevelt, you said both Teddy Roosevelt's main focus and Donald Trump's main focus was to help the middle class and the little guy, to promote a healthy and thriving and upwardly mobile middle class were at the core of their beliefs. So help me understand Trump's support for a particular class of people or a particular group versus, say, a class-based ideology. Karl Marx, right? So he's praising the proletariat
Mhm.
working class. He's trying to fight the establishment, or the bourgeoisie is what he called them, right? Do you think that there are similarities there, or is there important differences that we need to keep in mind?
Yeah, and you would know this as
Yeah,
well as anybody, that our founding fathers certainly, one of their intentions was to create, obviously, a happy, healthy society and a thriving middle class. As we've seen all throughout the world,
yeah,
with the potential of upward mobility, has always been the key to a happy society, a healthy society, and a place where people would want to live. You look at the ideas of communism, and it sounds good, where everybody's equal. I don't understand how that happens where everybody's equal. I don't think everybody's born equal. And on top of that, if everybody's equal, who gets all the good looking women? So that's where communism starts to fall apart. But,
Yeah.
Again, creating equality is nice and a nice idea, but, it just doesn't work. I think with Trump, he really identified that, God, the middle class here, they've been taxed to death. The rich have gotten out of this, or they've had plenty of money to pay for it, and the poor have a social net. But the middle class is just being eviscerated as jobs are being shipped overseas. And, we see, the consequence of what happens when you ship all your jobs to places like China, or it's too heavily weighted to go to China. With the end of the Cold War, it's really a shame. We all were supposed to get rich. That George Bush the first talked about a new world order, and he preached globalism, and I think we saw that also in American business schools. You talk about the collapse of wisdom. Academia is a complete failure from top to bottom, and I can remember sitting in business school talking about the concept of shareholder value driving all businesses, or being their guiding principle.
Yeah.
And some of us in class said, it's going to create problems. We're going to see people gain their stock price and ship jobs overseas, and that's what they did. And it destroyed the middle class. The middle class got creamed, and Trump came in and said, you know what? These people were abandoned by the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party used to be about labor unions, and now all these good manufacturing jobs are gone. So Trump fought for the middle class, and that's his base of support, and that's why he's popular.
Sure. And, he's taken a different approach, right? Because you look at, like, the communist solution was to essentially eliminate the entire other class, to use government to do it. And, like you said, the naive belief that that's going to fix everything and usher in equality. And it's never been true. Millions, people have died as a result. And you see what Trump is doing is he's putting the liberals and the elite on notice. But we're still having this debate. We're still having this discussion. There's still this back and forth between him and the media, right? I think what we're calling people to do is, it's the same thing that we're trying to do on this channel, is we're trying to facilitate that discussion between different perspectives, including examining those assumptions. And that's what academia should be doing, is it not? Is growing us in that way. And I see that in your book. I definitely do. I see a lot more substance and material than maybe someone would think goes into the average Trump supporter, and yet someone who is considering themselves to be a Trump supporter can feel validated by understanding that. So can you tell us more about how to get a copy of your book? You certainly convinced me. I'm going to get one and recommend our followers to do the same. So what's the easiest way to get a copy?
Yeah, the book's available just about everywhere, on Amazon, Walmart.com, BarnesandNoble.com, all over eBay. This weekend, in fact, I'm having a Kindle promotion, trying to get more reviews going. So there's a free book giveaway on Kindle this weekend. It's trying to help me build up, again, more ratings and reviews. So if you get it, leave a review, because I know once the liberals get a hold of it, they're going to give this book negative 5,000 stars. So that's what we're doing this weekend.
Okay, and we'll put the link in the description. So thank you, Mr. Cartman. Thank you so much for your time, being gracious with us, and we look forward to having you again.
Great. Thanks again, Wes. I appreciate the opportunity, and again, all the best on the show.
Thank you.